Back in 1857, the Indian subcontinent absolutely erupted. It was a firestorm of rebellion that shook the British Empire, one of the mightiest in the world, right to its very core. Now, this wasn't just another battle. Oh no. This was a violent, chaotic, and totally transformative moment that really redrew the map of power in a huge way. So you have to ask yourself, what on earth could push an entire people to that kind of breaking point?
And really, that's the big question we're digging into here. The Revolt of 1857 didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't some sudden flash flood of anger. No, this was the result of 100 years of simmering grievances, a slow burn that left the whole society like a tinderbox, just waiting for a spark.
So here's how we're going to break down this incredible story. First, we'll look at all those deep-rooted causes that made the land ready to burn. Then, we'll zoom in on the single spark that finally lit the flame. After that, we'll trace how the uprising spread like wildfire, figure out why it ultimately failed, and finally, explore the whole new era of rule that rose from its ashes.
All right, let's start with that tinderbox itself. Long before a single shot was fired, India was just simmering with resentment. You could find serious grievances at every single level of society.
Economically, the British policies were like a slow poison. Think about it. The peasants were being absolutely crushed by impossible taxes, which pushed them deep into debt they could never escape. The brilliant artisans who used to create these beautiful handicrafts for royal courts, well, their patrons were gone, so their livelihoods just vanished. High tariffs made it impossible for any local Indian industry to even compete. And it wasn't just the poor. Even the powerful landowners, the zamindars, were watching their ancestral lands get snatched away. This wasn't just a bad quarter. It was the systematic dismantling of their entire economic world.
And then there was the politics of it all. The British were playing this master-level game of chess. They had policies like the Subsidiary Alliance, which basically forced Indian rulers to pay for British troops to protect them. And then there was the infamous Doctrine of Lapse, which let the British just annex any state that didn't have a direct male heir. These moves systematically hollowed out the power of local leaders, until the once mighty Mughal emperor was nothing more than a symbol. For the everyday person, the system just felt corrupt, alien, and totally designed to keep them down.
And this is where things get really explosive, the socio-religious tensions. Now, some British reforms, like abolishing the practice of sati, might look progressive to us today, but back then, many saw it as a direct attack on their culture. You add in Christian missionaries trying to convert people, and these wild rumors, like bone dust being mixed into flour, and you get this potent cocktail of fear and anger. And no one felt this threat to their identity more than the Sepoys, the Indian soldiers who served the British.
So, you've got the fuel and you've got the oxygen. The whole country is just waiting to ignite. All it needed was one little spark. And that spark, funnily enough, came in the form of a new piece of military gear.
So here it is. This is the object that lit the fuse, the new Enfield rifle cartridge. To load the rifle, a soldier had to bite the end off. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The problem was the grease used to waterproof the paper. A rumor started spreading like wildfire that it was made from a mix of beef and pig fat. Now, for Hindu sepoys, the cow is sacred. For Muslim sepoys, the pig is unclean. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was an order to commit a profound religious sin. And when the sepoys suggested a simple fix, just use clarified butter or ghee, the British arrogantly refused. And that refusal, it was an absolutely fatal mistake.
And just look how fast everything spiraled out of control. In February, a whole regiment in Burhanpur refuses the cartridges. They're disbanded. In April, a sepoy named Mangal Pandey attacks his officers in Barakpur. He's executed. Then on May 9th, in Meerut, 85 soldiers are publicly humiliated, stripped of their uniforms, and thrown in prison for refusing. The very next day, their comrades had had enough. They rose up, stormed the prison, freed their friends, and marched on Delhi. Just like that, the revolt had begun.
From that single act of mutiny in Meerut, the rebellion just exploded across northern India. It turned from isolated pockets of anger into a massive, widespread uprising against British rule.
And the rebels' first move? It was an act of pure strategic genius. They captured Delhi, the historic heart of Indian power, and they proclaimed the elderly Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. This was huge. It instantly transformed a bunch of scattered mutinies into something much bigger. It gave the revolt a face, a sense of legitimacy, and a powerful symbol to rally behind, a call for a united Indian front against the British.
And leaders started rising to the occasion all over the region. In Delhi, you had General Bakht Khan taking charge. In Lucknow, the incredible Begum Hazrat Mahal led the resistance. Nana Saheb was leading the charge in Kanpur, and the old warrior Kunwar Singh was fighting in Bihar. Each one of these figures became a focal point, channeling all that popular anger into organized, armed resistance.
But among all these amazing leaders, one figure became an absolute legend: Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. Her courage and skill were so undeniable that even her enemies in the British press had to respect her. Get this, the Times of London called her the bravest and best military leader of the rebels. Just think about that for a second. That's an incredible testament to her leadership, coming from the very people she was fighting tooth and nail against.
And this is a point we absolutely have to hammer home. Calling this just a sepoy mutiny completely misses the bigger picture. Civilian participation was massive. In just one region, Awadh, it's estimated that over 100,000 civilians died. People weren't just watching this happen, they were actively in the fight, attacking symbols of British power, burning debt records, and fighting alongside the sepoys. This was a deep, popular uprising, fueled by a century of pure resentment.
But despite all that passion, all that initial success, the revolt was eventually crushed. So you have to wonder, what went wrong? How did the British manage to put out such a widespread and ferocious fire?
Well, this slide really lays it all out. It was a classic case of imbalance. On one side, the rebels had incredible courage, but they were essentially a collection of separate movements. There was no single coordinating leader, no unified goal. They were fighting with swords and old muskets. On the other side, the British had a modern, disciplined army with superior weapons and, crucially, a game-changing piece of technology, the electric telegraph. It allowed them to coordinate troop movements in real time, which was a massive strategic advantage. Plus, they held on to key regions like Bombay and Madras, giving them a stable base to operate from.
So, the revolt failed. But it completely and utterly transformed the subcontinent. The British had been profoundly shaken, and they were absolutely determined that nothing like this would ever happen again.
The most immediate change was the Government of India Act of 1858, and this was a total reset. The East India Company, the massive corporation that had essentially ruled for a century, was dissolved, gone. Power was transferred directly to the British Crown, and the title of Governor-General was replaced by Viceroy, who was the Queen's personal representative. This was the formal, official beginning of the British Raj.
The entire structure of the empire was redesigned with one thing in mind: total control. The army was reorganized based on a divide-and-rule strategy. They started recruiting heavily from what they called martial races, groups like the Gurkhas and Punjabis who had stayed loyal during the revolt. Racial lines were drawn much more sharply in the government, effectively locking Indians out of top jobs. And all those social reforms, the British dropped them like a hot potato. They decided it was just way too dangerous to meddle in local customs ever again.
So when all is said and done, how do we remember this massive event today? Well, the truth is, it's complicated. Historians are still deeply divided. For some, like John Seeley, it was nothing more than a selfish sepoy mutiny. For others, like V.D. Savarkar, it was nothing less than the First War of Indian Independence. The very fact that we're still arguing over what to even call it tells you just how complex and powerful its legacy really is.
Which brings us right back to that final, tough question. The events of 1857 were a messy, human-driven storm. You had personal grievances, religious fears, political ambition, and a genuine, burning desire to drive out a foreign power, all mixed together. So was it a selfless war for independence, or just a selfish mutiny over some grease cartridges? The real answer, as it so often does, probably lies somewhere in that complex, violent, and world-changing space right in between.